It's our pleasure to welcome you to this webinar again, celebrating the joy of Black history in the world language classroom. And it's my pleasure to introduce our amazing speaker for today, Kia D. London. Kia is a dedicated educator and advocate for equity in the world language education. With a BA in Spanish and an MA in linguistics, she brings 17 years of teaching experience to her role. She's currently teaching Spanish to 5th and 6th graders, and she also serves as a DEI coordinator in her school community. As an active board member of ICFL, she co-develops and leads affinity groups, providing professional development opportunities and informal gatherings for teachers. Kia is the recipient of multiple awards, including the 2022 ICFL Distinguished Service Award and the 2023 AATSP Award for Excellence in Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Through her brand, Trailblaze into Language Learning, Kia offers workshops and webinars on student representation, intercultural competence, and second language acquisition. She's a published writer, crafting comprehensible curriculum materials focused on African identities, DEI, and student representation. And her passion lies in empowering educators to provide inclusive instruction, ensuring every student sees themselves reflected in the curriculum. Thank you for being with us, Kia.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here with you all. This is one of my favorite topics to really talk about, and I look forward to really sharing what I am doing in my classroom, as well as sharing what I am still learning. So we're going to go ahead and we are going to get started. Okay, so first off, we are going to really talk about answering the why and discussing the importance of centering the joy and celebrations of people of African descent in the world language classroom throughout the year. Here are our objectives. So the first thing that I'm going to dive into is the importance of representation and belonging in the world language classroom. Next, I'm going to share with you all resources and strategies that highlight people of African descent. And finally, I'm going to speak with you all about the importance of being purposeful in making intercultural connections with the identities of the students that you are currently serving in your classrooms and also within your school communities. So, representation and belonging in the world language classroom. So one thing I really want us to understand here is if we are valuing representation and belonging, it requires the process of reflective questions. If we're thinking about our classroom, our curriculum, and also who we are currently serving in our classroom, our students. So number one, what is the motive for using the content that you currently have? So thinking about that why. Are we utilizing the current content because this is what has always been? Or are we really utilizing it for the purpose of really wanting to reach our students, connect with our students, as well as ensure that we are creating a space of belonging? So, belonging when it comes to their identities, belonging when it comes to the content within the curriculum, how you are teaching, the strategies that you are using. So all of that ties in, the representation piece and the belonging piece ties in to what it is that we are going to be talking about today. The other question that I have posted up here is what you are choosing in your curriculum and or in your lessons, is it an accurate representation of the community, or is it coming from a biased perspective? So the fact of the matter is that we all have blind spots, meaning there's certain things that may be from either our past experiences, current experiences, or upbringing that we might be used to be doing. But then we might have someone that comes up alongside of us and says, like, hey, did you think about this? Are you able to look at this from another perspective? So that's what I mean by the bias perspective. So really thinking about how can we ensure the content and the representation that we are providing is coming from an equitable perspective of really taking a look at who our students are, where they're coming from, and also what they need. What do our students need? What does our school community need? What is not being spoken? What is always being talked about? So, really reflecting on that. And then the very last question I have here is, are we only focusing on the worst parts of history and not centering the joy of celebrating the influences of Black people? This is really, really important. I really think about, for example, the movie industry and how growing up, and again, pertaining to Black history, growing up, there really weren't a lot of movies that portrayed people that looked like me in a life. So for example, like a family just going about, their daily tasks. I'm reminded right now of a few series that come to mind. But movies, I just remember there were a lot of movies that came out that really centered on the enslavement piece of Black and people of African descent. And so, yes, that is part of our history. However, that should not be the only thing that we focus on within our school community, within our classrooms, and also within our conversations when it comes to discussing influences, perspectives of Black history. We really want to make sure that we are centering in on the joy, the celebration, the influences that are happening, that have happened from past to present, and what is happening into the future. Okay, so the very first thing we're going to talk about is our resources and strategies. Here are a few tips before I share examples that I have for you all. Number one, you want to make sure that you are centering in on student interests pertaining to the Black community. Okay, so depending on which particular grade level that you are teaching, find out what their interests are. We all know our students, whether it's food, and these are just examples, whether it's food, music, fashion, sports, technology. Find out what that interest is. And then really think about, okay, how have Black people been influential in these different areas that we are seeing? What is happening, right? So, for example, I'm thinking about the app TikTok, which I believe everybody knows what TikTok is. If you don't, it's a very popular app in which you can upload a lot of videos. People have a lot of things that they're speaking about on this app of TikTok. And so, what I've noticed a lot of times with a lot of dances that are happening on TikTok, a lot of those dances are stemming from people within the Black community. So, even if you have students in your class that are on TikTok and they love TikTok, you can use dance. That's an excellent way, especially if they're interested in dance and that music and tapping into that. The second thing is avoiding stereotypes. Okay. Um, when we fall into stereotypes, it can be very, very harmful. It can not only be harmful um, to you as the teacher, as the instructor, but it can be even more harmful for the students as well, regardless of their race, ethnicity, or background. Um, but it can be very, very harmful. So we want to make sure that we are avoiding stereotypes. And last but not least, you want to use themes within your curriculum to inspire you to center Black history on a deeper level. So again, going back up to the student interest, I know for me personally, the way my curriculum has been created, it has happened over time, like over the last few years. And so it's very student driven in terms of what my students are interested in. For example, the very first theme, I'm going to say theme that we talk about with my middle schoolers is identities. We center in on identities because my middle schoolers love to talk about themselves. At that age, they like to talk about where they're from, who they are, what they like to do, what they're doing after school, and so forth. So, in me knowing that, okay, how can I tie this to Black history? Wow, there's a particular person from this particular area, for example, Equatorial Guinea, um, the only Spanish speaking country in Africa, that is a singer. And, I know one of my students loves to sing. So let's learn a little bit more about her and how we can tie that connection together. Okay, so we're going to spend a little bit of time on this page. Here I have a variety of different resources, and I am going to be talking about strategies that you can use right away in the classroom currently. Okay. And even if you feel, because we know Black History Month is February, don't feel the need to rush and just kind of say, like, oh, I got to get all this done within February. No, you don't. And we're going to talk about why later. But really listen and you want to take your time. And some of these ideas, maybe you've used, maybe you've heard, and hopefully you'll be able to grab something new that you can incorporate further. So the very first thing I'm going to talk about is hair love. Okay. Um, if you don't know about hair love, it is a very short video, very short movie. It's posted on YouTube. I believe written and directed by Matthew Cherry, and it won an Oscar. Correct me if I'm wrong. And it is amazing. It's amazing for so many different reasons. It's perfect for identities, if you're looking to really center in on, you know, who people are, where they're from, their background, it's perfect for identities. It's perfect for being able to talk about and go through like the daily routine. As you can see there, the very first um, picture or slide, there's a calendar, there's pictures. I mean, you can talk about colors in here, you can describe what's happening in the target language. You can even pause the movie, ask questions with the students in the target language, like what's going on, who are the characters, what do they look like, and so forth. But anyway, with Hair Love, it takes you through a journey of a young Black girl who is really trying to figure out, um, you know, what to do with her hair. And so it is a situation where her mother is recovering from being in the hospital, and you see her mother at the very end of the video. And so the father, um, he goes through this process of trying to do his daughter's hair. And so the daughter is like unsatisfied for the first few times where she's like, oh, no, this isn't right. And so eventually, um, they both work together, and she pulls up a YouTube video of her mom talking about how to do hair and specifically how to do Black hair. And it is a wonderful, wonderful way to not only talk about differences, but also make connections and that representation piece. I remember I've shown this video and we've used it in my class. And last year, my fifth graders that I had last year, they're currently sixth graders right now. Um, one of my fifth graders was like, Profe, podemos ver Hair Love? You know, can we watch Hair Love? And so I was actually planning on showing it at some point, like within my curriculum. But he asked right away and he kept asking, you know. And I said, okay, sure, yeah, we can watch it. And so it was amazing. My strategy for using it, I gave, first of all, we talked about the beginning. We went through vocabulary, important vocabulary that I felt that would be useful for them. They had a handout, and I had created some guided questions after previewing the video. And so I would show the video, and then after that, I would pause and I would ask a question, whole group. And then at one point, I would have, since my students sit in groups, I would have them share out with one another and go through some of the questions in the target language after they wrote down the answers to the questions. And so it brought up a lot of different conversations, conversations about hair and describing hair. So writing the definition for straight and curly in Spanish and so forth. And I remember there was one particular student, she seemed a little hesitant about saying this. And I understand why, because she was just kind of like, I don't want to be wrong when I say this, but I'm going to try. And she raised her hand and she wanted to describe the hair as tangly, if I recall. And I looked and I said, okay, I said curly, you know, because when you watch this, and if you have or haven't used this already in your classroom, there are a variety of different types of hair that we as Black people have. And so it's not always going to be super curly. It might be wavy, maybe it's straight. So that was very, very insightful. And this is another way to really have those discussions in your class when it comes to the presence of the Black community within your curriculum. Okay, the next thing I'm going to talk about up here, you all, is, oh, I'm just going to click that. Okay. Next thing I'm going to talk about up here is a scavenger hunt. Okay. So this is a picture of the corner of my classroom right here. And as you can see, I have some posters. And shout out to Profe Tukman, Laura Tukman, and I hope I pronounced her name correctly. Um, these posters came from her, and so I really like them because they featured a number of different people up here. So you have Harriet Tubman, you have Sha'Carri, who is the track star, you have Dr. Martin Luther King, you have Marsha, you have Cesar, and I can go on and on. And so what I decided to really do is, you know what, let's have a let's have a gallery walk. Okay. I don't know if you all have done gallery walks before in your class, but basically what it is, whatever content it is that you want to post and put on the wall, if it's pictures, if it's a short reading, or if it's parts of a short story, you put it on your wall and you have the students work in groups. They can work in groups, they can work in pairs, and they travel together and they walk around your classroom. So what I had them do, they received a description of 8 different people in that classroom, in my classroom. It was in the target language, as you all can see. And so they had to figure out who I was talking about on the wall. And I feel like sometimes, I know like as world language teachers, we love to decorate our room, and some of us, we might have a theme happening. I remember a friend of mine had like a sloth, like Amazon theme, and I thought it was so cool. She had all this green, and I was like, wow, and which is so great. But also, we don't want to forget how we can use that space, right? So, how can we use that space? So, my students, my 5th and 6th grade students, did a gallery walk. Um, what I did do first, we went over vocabulary, and I did have vocabulary posted because there were a few new words that I included into the descriptions. And so I had them work together if they wanted to work in pairs, if they wanted to work in groups, and they had to walk around and figure out who exactly was being described, utilizing their background knowledge as well as what they are learning now in terms of within our school community and also within their classes. It went really, really well. And I'm going to talk about what I did following up in about a few minutes. But this is also something that you can do. And the one thing I do want to say with the gallery walk and the pictures, you don't want to use this as like, okay, that's it. We did it this month. It's a one and done thing. Find a way to really go back to the people or communities that they learned about. So you can tie them in to later themes within your curriculum, which will really encourage you to consistently build and consistently center and or integrate equitably voices of African and or Black descent and Black people. The other resource, if you are on Twitter, this is an excellent resource by Jennifer White, Saldana, very good friend of mine. Lately, she has been posting from her blog account short, informational, historical things pertaining to the Black community. And for example, she has Celebrating Black History and Rice Legacy, right? So she's got from the Carolinas to Latin America, Rice has deep roots in Black culture, enslaved Africans transformed, marshlands. It's a thriving rice field, shaping cuisines for generation. And so I follow her on Twitter and I'm looking at this. I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is perfect. This is great. This is another thing, another resource that you can use to incorporate into your world language classroom. Now, of course, making sure that, this is information that you can put in the target language, whichever target language that you're teaching in for your students, but you have the pictures right here. And even if it's like a question of the day, I know I do a question of the day in general with my students, but even if it's just like, hey, we have a question of the day about rice. What do you know about this when it comes to rice? And then this is information that you can share with your students. You all can have a discussion, however it is that you see fit. But this is an excellent tool to use. This other picture down here, you all, actually, I'm representing the literature here. I use a lot of literature in my class, short stories, classroom readers, poems, even short stories that I've written, especially if I find that there's a certain topic that I want to talk about. And if I'm not able to find it either from my own toolkit or tool set, um, or if I'm not able to find it elsewhere, I'll just say, okay, let me just go ahead and write something. So literature, short stories, poems, excellent way to really center the Black joy, Black communities. There are a number of different places in which you can find, literature. This particular image right here is coming from the name of the magazine is called Voces, Las Voces de la Diáspora. And so it's in Spanish, but it really highlights the celebrations and the joy of different people of African descent. So if you are a Spanish teacher, that would be a wonderful, wonderful resource to use. But there are other outlets as well that you can use. So when you use literature in centering voices of the Black community, you do want to make sure first you want to go through vocabulary, which is really important. Making sure if you need to scaffold or if you need to talk through certain types of vocabulary, you want to make sure that you do that first. Okay. And if it means like, hey, can you look over asking someone else to like, can you look over this? This is what I'm interested in presenting to my students in the target language. Do you see anything here? Maybe, should I use this particular vocabulary word? Should I not? That's a great way, again, avoiding like blind spots. And then, you can either read if you're used to doing class readers, you can read together, or you can have the students read independently if there's like an audiobook, but always make sure you have a discussion. You want to make sure you have a discussion about the material that your students are reading so that that leaves room for not only the deeper level of understanding, but also it leaves room to make connections, which is what I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. The very last thing I want to share with you all is Learning for Justice. Learning for Justice is an organization. If you Google it, you'll find it. Wonderful, wonderful site for really centering Black history. There's like a list of do's and don'ts. They've got wonderful content. If you want to dive deeper into the civil rights movement and different people and how you can tie that together with your curriculum, I highly suggest that you really check them out. I use them on a daily basis. They have a number of different frameworks, but that would be an excellent tool as well. Okay, so going back to I know I said earlier, leaving space for reflection. This is what I'm talking about. So, intercultural connections with all of the material with Black history. Um, really thinking about from the perspective of your students, from what I am learning, how can I make connections with my own experiences and my own culture? This is something that I do with my fifth graders and also my sixth graders. I know it might seem a bit like, oh my gosh, how do you do that? There is a way to do it, and I am going to talk to you. I'm talking to y'all about it right now. Um, because it really gets them to think like, okay, I have learned or I'm learning about food within the Black community. How can I tie that to my own experience? Okay, wait, do I like rice? Yeah, I do. I really like rice. Do I always eat rice in my own culture? Yeah, I do. Right, exactly. So, taking that example leads us to the next question. How do I grow in my understanding in order to view real world issues from a different perspective? Okay, so this is that entire intercultural connections piece. So, for example, one thing I had my students do after they completed the gallery walk, they had to talk about this and they also had to write about it, which is something I highly, highly recommend. So they had to briefly tell me in the target language, what did they learn? Even if it was like one or two things, or if they wanted to go into detail, depending on their level of proficiency, perfectly fine. And then the following question was, how are you going to apply this information? And that was a challenge for them. So I really had to break that down. And what I said to them, I said, okay, so if you learn, for example, Celia Cruz, okay, was the queen, the Afro Latina queen of salsa. And now her face will be on the coin of the United States currency. What does that show you? What are some characteristics in her personality? What does that show you? And it's like, oh, is she passionate for what she believes in? She worked hard. Yeah, there you go, just like that. And so, in utilizing that example with one of my students, they were able to connect it to, okay, great. So Celia Cruz worked really hard. Okay. So then that means if I want to get to where I want to be, or if I want to achieve any goals that I have for myself, then that means that I need to work hard as well, because this is something that she did. So that is an example. Okay. The last example I'm going to show you all dealing with intercultural connections. Um, Notice here, I have a Venn diagram. This is so helpful. This is perfect to use. And you can use it with your beginning students to your advanced students. It just works. And you can differentiate it however you need to do it. For example, my fifth and sixth graders every year, we do a final project end of the year. I personally was just kind of like, you know what, maybe we should get rid of this and do something else. But based on what my students wanted, student centered, they're like, no, Profe, we love the final end of the year project. We keep it. So this was done by a student of mine a couple years ago who's now in eighth grade. Um, he chose to do some research on Cesar Chavez. Okay. And so with that, he decided to talk about him, write about him alongside Gaspar Yanga, okay, who was the first Afro-Mexican prince in Mexico, within the free region of Mexico at the time. And so I thought this was so cool because over here he had Cesar, and then over here he had Gaspar. And then the red part is the connection. So then he was able to not only show me what he learned, what connections, right? They both had together, okay? But then from there, I added an additional part that he had to answer. Did they advocate for someone or a situation? Do you view them both as a role model? What is your takeaway or reflection after learning about these people? And what connections and comparisons can you make to the person that you researched? And so this was information that the student had to use in order to answer, right, the question. And he did talk about what he learned. And this is another excellent way of how you can bridge the intercultural connection with what it is that you're doing in your classroom, especially as it relates to Black History Month. Venn diagram, excellent way to go. Okay, so final takeaways that I have for you all. I might not have mentioned everything, but I really wanted to try and give you all a broad scope, a broad view of what you can do in terms of the joy and the celebration of Black History Month. Black history is American history. And I think that that is very, very important place to start from. Not only within your school community, with who you work with, your teachers, your colleagues, but with your students. Black history is American history. And I feel like oftentimes it has always been seen as like this additional thing. Like here is American history in the middle, and then Black history is over here. And no, that's not true. Black history is American history. And that's the reality, and that's what it is. Um, use this month to dive deeper into content centering people of African descent and Black people. Okay. So, yes, if you have a theme or topic on, music or exploring musicians or exploring the civil rights movement and the target language, or if it's people, or if it's a community, or if it's an indigenous African community, yes, wonderful. Use it to dig and dive deeper. Okay. However, my final point, don't stop here. Don't just say, okay, we did our theme, our topic on Black history. We're going to go back to what we're doing before. Because then it becomes like a one type token thing. And if we are operating from the standpoint of that Black history is American history, we need to make sure that that is being represented in our curriculum, right? Because in world languages, we have our 5 C's, right? And really the main C that we're really talking about here when it comes to centering Black history is culture, because we know that within each of our world languages and their various communities, there are Black people. And we know that. And we know that from the very beginning, from the history, beginning with enslavement, involuntary enslavement, right? Up until fast forward to now. So don't stop here. Very, very important. Keep going, keep building a little bit more every month. And it will continue to build on its own, where you're adding, you're taking out, and then you realize you have a wonderful, wonderful curriculum, an equitable curriculum that has Black history, Black communities in the curriculum. And that is all that I have to share with you all on this afternoon. Um, Thank you all so much for tuning in. Hopefully, you were able to grab some nuggets of wisdom. Again, there's so much more to this topic, and I'm glad that I was able to share what I was able to share with what I'm doing in my classroom. If you want to connect and contact me for even more things, my information is right there. It's bit.ly/K London.
What strategies can educators use to ensure that Black history is represented authentically and comprehensively in the language classroom?
Okay. So I would say the first thing I want to say is you want to start with what we call low hanging fruit, right? So if we have a tree, what's the very first step that we can take? Um, First thing I would say is start with visuals, start with pictures. Depending on who it is you want to center. I mean, there's so many different categories. And also with that, it goes back to your student interests too. So, for example, I'm just going to say music for the sake of music, but if if your student interest is music, right? And again, if we're thinking about the low hanging fruit and starting with pictures, you can even start with Googling images of Black musicians that are out there. And I know that there's a lot of different hip hop artists. You can start there. And then if you use something like Picture Talk, which is a comprehensible input strategy, um, what you can do, you can use that picture of that musician, put it up on the screen, utilize it in a lesson, and you can first scaffold questions. It can be a part of the identity unit. If you have an identity unit of like, okay, what is his name? What are some characteristics? Like, what is this person like? What instrument does this person play? Where is this person from? And, before you are, coming up with those questions, I would say you might want to write like a brief paragraph, a brief blurb about who that musician is. And then that way your students have that to read. You can read it together as a class, or either have them read it in groups or pairs, and then go through those questions, and then you turn it into picture talk. So that's one way, low hanging fruit. Another way is literature. There's tons of literature out there. I know, can I give the name of a website? I just want to make sure. Name of a website?
Yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
okay. It is cpli.net. Cpli.net has a whole a lot of different categories of different literature written by people of African descent, Black people, and there are stories that center people of African descent, that center Black people in a variety of different languages there. And I'm trying to think, my mind is like racing, racing, racing. Also, music is another way. And I know I just talked about music, but I'm thinking about, even if you have a country that you're exploring, for example, and I'm going to use Cuba. So within the Cuban culture, there's a certain type of music that's played. Rumba is one of them. And it stems from the Afro-Cuban community. So even starting there, thank you. I'm looking at the comments. Even starting there, and finding samples of that and using that with your class. So those are just some examples of low hanging fruit. There's also social media. If you're not on social media, I highly recommend, and reason being is because there's so many authentic resources. There's a lot of voices all over the world, um, Black voices, voices of African descent, where you're seeing their content and getting it then and there that you can take like pics of and share with your class and have a discussion about. Oh, thank you.
Fantastic. Then, a second question we have is, what are your thoughts about not using English at the novice level in an attempt to go a little more deeply into a topic?
Okay, that's a good question. So not using English, that was it? Not using English?
Exactly.
Okay. Okay. So this is I I think honestly, and this is my personal opinion, because this is something that I've done with my sixth graders actually. They range from novice to intermediate low. Um, I think that you can do it. It is doable. Now, whether or not, depending on the structure of your lesson and your class in terms of, how long you have a discussion versus what the actual like group or paired activity is, I would say the main thing is scaffolding. So you want to make sure that you have the vocabulary front and center for the students so that they are able to use it. You can use sentence starters, um, which are great to have so that you can post that on the board, or even if it's like a small slip of paper, like you know, in terms of like sitting at their desk. And if certain questions come up where the students are like, como se dice, that's perfectly fine. I mean, I'm always writing on the board if there's vocabulary either that I didn't remember to like put up or if something like pops up. But I think that it is doable if you have those things in place. So like the vocab list, the questions, scaffolded, and even guided questions.
Fantastic. There was a typo and it was actually about using English to go deeper, but I suppose that everything that you just said could
Yeah,
apply to this.
yeah, totally. Yeah, you can totally use English to go deeper. There have been times where I've done that too. So yeah, of course. Yep.
Fantastic. The next question would be on how can we continue to celebrate and honor Black History Month beyond designated, well, Black history in general, beyond designated Awareness Month or special events within the language classroom and throughout the academic year?
I think really looking at your curriculum, and looking at your topics and themes. I have a colleague that she started a running spreadsheet, which is something that I need to do. You all, just full transparency, my Google Drive is a mess. Help. um, like real talk, it's a mess. But she started a spreadsheet where she has like the name of the theme or topic, and I'm for some reason food, probably because I'm hungry. Um, where it says like food, and then she has people, and then she outlines like the communities, the places, and then she has something else. And so I think if that's something that you use, but really taking a look at who is it being talked at and not talked at, but who is it being talked about and who is it being represented? That's really a great place to start. I mean, for example, I'm trying to think of a recent one that we've done. Oh, okay. So with fifth grade, we're reading a book right now, and it's about this student who is living in Madrid, España. And so what I wanted to do, I mean, the book does a good job at outlining just certain cultural aspects when it comes to what the schools are like and what the pastries are and things like that, and other cultural influences within the country of Spain. But for me, what I noticed, I was like, ooh, I'm like, nothing is being said here about about African descendants or Black Hispanics and whatnot. So immediately I on my own did research, and I was like, okay, who do I need to know about that is Black, and also has Spanish heritage as well. And so that's where I started. And I will say that there's also stories and resources on people of African descent in Spain. And so that's one way that you can really keep yourself accountable. The calendar, I get what you mean. Like, I mean, lately over the years, it's like the calendar, there's every theme, each calendar, there's a different theme. Each month, there's a different theme, there's different holidays. And I think that that's a good place to start. um, it's a good place to start. But again, as far as ensuring that you're being fluid with equitably having Black history, Black influence within your curriculum, I would start with, just having a checkpoint like a spreadsheet. I think that that would be good. And really like having, reflecting on, okay, wait, we're talking about Ecuador. Okay, what's happening in Ecuador right now? Who are people in Ecuador that I should know about, that my students don't know about, that are of African descent? Where are the communities? So really kind of looking at it from that perspective.
Okay, that sounds fantastic. And this should be our final question, unless anyone else has another one. Are there any common challenges that educators may encounter when integrating Black history into their language lessons, and how can these be overcome?
Yeah, I will say, given, the climate in terms of depending on where you teach, and districts and things like that, I think everybody's challenge is going to be different. But what I do tell educators is, should you run into any type of challenge, always go back to culture, because when we look at the 5 C's, one of those C's is culture. And so with the standards, the world language readiness standards, we have a responsibility as world language educators to ensure that we are giving our students everything that they need, in order to understand in order for them to understand and learn about the various cultures that are represented within the target language communities. And so when you think about that, that includes Black people. So
Pretty good. I believe that was our last question. Yes. So again, Kia, thank you very much for being with us today, for everything you taught us. It was an amazing webinar. And thank you everyone for being with us as well. As you know, you can contact us if you have any additional questions you just thought about and you want them for us to deliver them to Kia. Here is an email address you can write us to, is marketing@cletwl.com. You can send us an email. We will forward them to Kia, Again, remember that you will receive the recording and the slides in a week or two, so don't worry if you missed anything or if you forgot anything. Remember, please, to get the feedback form if possible. Just put us in there how you felt, anything you want for us, any feedback. We will really appreciate that. And just keep in touch for our next webinars. As I mentioned earlier today, we have a webinar about the standards. Actually, Kia, you mentioned the 5 Cs, so we have a webinar about one of those, about one of the standards, technically based on Florida, but this is useful for everyone on the 2nd of March. And we will have other webinars that you can check on our website, cledwl.com. So I hope you all have an amazing weekend, and thank you.
Thank you all so much.